Well, let's speak now to David Davis, leading that group of MPs, joins us now on GB News Live. Thank you very much, Mr Davis, for joining us. Lee Anderson saying, the letters to number 10 don't seem to be doing anything. Why do you think this one might be different?
Well, because it's fairly clear. This is a new problem. I mean, the Albanian problem, which we're focusing on primarily for this, is a new problem. It's grown up in the last year, 12,000, really from next to nothing a year earlier. Is a huge increase. It's overwhelming the system. And the Albanians are coming from a safe country. I mean, we're all members of the European Convention on Human Rights. They have got less complaints against them than we have in the court. So they're a safe country, first off. And we aren't the only person to think that. The Swedes, with a fantastic human rights record and so on, have, from the beginning of 2021, over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, have said, if you come from Albania, you can't claim asylum, you're sent straight back. No ifs or buts, you go straight back. The only qualification of that is if there's some other consideration, humanitarian consideration. So that's half the problem. The other half of the problem is if that doesn't work, they're told by the people who bring them, and bear in mind, the Albanians themselves may be perfectly decent people, but the people who bring them are criminals. Understand that. So the people who bring them tell them, claim this, claim you've been trafficked and you can't come back. Well, it seems to me a fairly straightforward, common sense change to that. If we change the law on trafficking to say, if you come from a safe country, we can send you back to your own home. And if you want to pursue a legal case, then you can do so from there, not from here. Those two things together would allow us to, for all new migrants arriving across the channel, pretty much to send them back within days. Certainly not weeks, months or years as it is now. And that would stop this system being overwhelmed.
So this was specifically target, as you say, that the schooling or the coaching, as Mark White, indeed, our Home Affairs editor, has identified, where the gangs tell people what to say when they arrive. However, I just wonder how many legal appeals and other processes would go on, even if you managed to change and update the law.
Well, one of the problems is the longer you take, the more appeals you get. There's a harsh truth that if they're here for a couple of weeks, they'll find a British lawyer and away they go. If they're here for a couple of years, they'll meet somebody, get married, have children, and then the story's over. They can stay because they have family rights. So the quicker you do it, the better. But the best thing I can do is point you to the Swedish example. The Swedes introduced this in April, I think, of last year, 2021, and they've got zero asylum approval since then, zero. And they did it off the back of an international court, a European court judgment. So it's based on international law. And lots of people say, oh, well, we will be able to. No, we won't. So if we got the gumption to do it with all new arrivals from a safe country, I don't mean from Syria or Afghanistan, where they may have a claim, but from a safe country, then frankly, it should knock out almost all of the 12,000 a year that we're looking at the moment.
Right. Mark White has updated us that at least 7 boats were intercepted today, the weather conditions having improved overnight. Now, this comes after we gave the French government yet more money to actually patrol and police their beaches. Is this another failure of that particular policy?
Well, obviously it is at one level. I mean, I think that the Home Office is starting to tighten up. In fact, I went to see them a couple of weeks ago. Let me be straightforward about it. I went to talk to them about tightening up their own surveillance, because in my view, we should be able to detect these people on the beach in France and immediately notify the French, so that actually help the French do the job. We haven't, I don't think, done that yet. I think our own surveillance is a bit patchy. So I would. It is a failure, but I give it a couple of weeks to bed down. But frankly, that by itself won't solve it, because what happens? The French police find them, they destroy the boat, and they release them, and they don't come and have another go. They don't arrest them, and I think people shouldn't be under any misapprehension about this. This is not an agreement for the French police to take them into custody. It's just for them to make it difficult. And of course, if you try 2, 3, 4 times, eventually you get across. So I think we've got to take away the legal basis, the loopholes that are acting as a pull factor for these people. And that allows us then to do it properly with the other ones.
Yeah, and given that this letter is signed by you, 50 MPs, including Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, what does that indicate to perhaps Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman about the depth of feeling on the backbenches that this is a government failing in this particular policy?
Well, what it tells them is that pretty much every wing of the party is in agreement about how to address this. You had Lee Anderson on before, but Peter Bottomley, the Father of the House, who's normally seen as from the left of the party as the signatory, it's from everywhere. And it didn't really take as much effort to get 50. And we've got another 10 who are signed but are not public, 10 Privy Councillors. It's really, really right across the party. So what it's telling you is that we all want to do something about it. And this sort of thing that we're talking about in this letter is both practical and popular with the party. And bear in mind, by the way, I am probably the MP that stood up most for asylum seekers, for protecting people's rights, for the rule of law. You would normally expect me to be very careful about this, and I have been. But this is about the abuse of asylum law, not the use of asylum law.
Yeah, and of course the involvement, as you said, of criminal gangs. Mr. Davis, stay with us if you will. I'm just going to bring in the issue of China because Sir James Cleverly's been speaking on that. So we'll just update people on that, and I'll be interested to get your view in reaction, because authorities in China cracking down on those protests over the COVID restrictions, one of the most serious challenges facing the Communist Party. This is what James Cleverly said a little earlier.
Protests against the Chinese government are rare. And when they do happen, I think the world should take notice, but I think the Chinese government should take notice. It's clear that the Chinese people themselves are deeply unhappy with what is going on, about the restrictions imposed upon them by the Chinese government. These are the voices of Chinese people talking to their government, and I think it's right that the Chinese government listens to what those people are saying.
Foreign Secretary earlier, David Davis, still with us. And of course, Mr. Davis, Rishi Sunak's giving this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet tonight on foreign policy. The phrase being used, I gather, is robust pragmatism. People just wondering what that means. Is it actually a return to George Osborne's still trying to engage on a commercial level, perhaps, with the Chinese?
I think it's very hard to avoid engaging at a commercial level with China if you buy a telephone or a camera or a television or even the computer I'm talking to you on now. A large part of it is always made in China. So there is a bit of a practical limit on what you can do in terms of trade actions. But what we shouldn't do is, I guess the phrase is kowtow to China. And after the early Cameron Osborne government had difficulties with China, they did basically become really too soft with them. As we did with Putin after Litvinenko.
Yes, indeed.
Guess what happened to kill Skripal? This is a story across the board, that when you're dealing with these totalitarian states, you're pretty much dealing with the guy at the top. You're dealing with an individual. So the psychology is straightforward. You have to be firm with them. You have to be tough with them. And you have to do things, if need be, that's painful for them. We're not going to shut off all trade, but I think there's quite a lot we can do short of that. Now, James is the Foreign Secretary, and so he's always diplomatic. He says, well, it's not often you get demonstrations in China calling for the leader to go. Yeah, and there's a reason for that. You end up dead if you do that in most totalitarian states, and I suspect the same is true in China, or imprisoned, or your life ruined in some way. So it is a spectacular event that's going on. I think, really, it can't be overstated. Not since Tiananmen Square we've seen anything quite like this. And one of the first things we should do is say to the Chinese government, you treat these demonstrators properly. If we see you locking them up and punishing them, then there'll be a consequence for that. That's the first thing to do. China is on a very, very slow march to being a modern state. It's sort of a pseudo-capitalist state at the moment, and it's a semi-democracy, and we need to get it on the move towards being a proper democracy, which means rights for demonstrators.
Although, of course, many would say that our voice was... that our voice was ignored over Hong Kong, but of course that's another issue. But David Davis, thank you very much indeed for your time and joining us here on GB News as ever. Thanks for your views.